Tremors was never supposed to leave you uneasy. It was sold as a desert creature feature funny, explosive, and cleanly resolved. Monsters killed, town saved, roll credits. But what if that ending wasn't the one the filmmakers originally built toward? What if the final moments were meant to quietly suggest that the threat didn't end at all, that it simply went dormant? And if that scene existed, why was it softened, buried, and never officially acknowledged? Because hidden inside Tremors is a final implication the studio didn't want audiences thinking about. Number 1. The ending that originally refused closure. In the version audiences know, Tremors ends with relief. The graboids are dead. The town survives. The desert returns to silence. But in early cuts, the ending did not resolve that cleanly. After the final creature is destroyed, the camera was meant to linger, not on the characters, on the ground, a subtle vibration, a faint disturbance, nothing explosive, nothing obvious. Just enough movement to suggest that what was killed was not the whole problem. This moment reframed the victory as temporary. The graboids weren't an invasion, they were part of the land, and killing a few didn't remove the conditions that created them. Test audiences found the moment unsettling rather than satisfying. The studio flagged it as tonally dangerous. The implication was pulled back. The vibration reduced, the sense of escalation muted. The monsters were defeated, but the land was not. Number 2. Why the ground is the true antagonist. Tremors never treats its creatures like masterminds. They don't plan. They don't stalk emotionally. They respond to vibration, to movement, to sound. In early script drafts, the film leaned harder into this idea. The graboids were not villains, they were symptoms. The real threat was the terrain itself, unpredictable, unmapped, and hostile to human assumptions. The hidden ending reinforced that idea. The desert wasn't conquered, it was misunderstood. The characters survived by learning one narrow rule set that happened to work once. That implication made the film less comforting, so it was softened. But the logic never left the movie. It's why the danger in Tremors always feels environmental rather than personal. Number 3. The joke that wasn't meant to be a joke. Near the end of the film, a casual line is delivered as humor, a comment about the town, the future, or the land itself. In the theatrical cut, it plays as release. In the original assembly, that line landed differently because it was paired with visual contradiction. The characters spoke confidently. The ground did not agree. The line was never meant to reassure. It was meant to expose denial. Humans declaring victory while standing on something they still didn't understand. The visual half of that moment was reduced. The line stayed. The meaning didn't. That's why the ending feels oddly unfinished to some viewers even decades later. Number 4. Why the scene was never advertised as deleted. Unlike many removed endings, this moment was never promoted as an alternate version. There were no interviews teasing it, no behind-the-scenes featurettes, no director commentary pointing it out. Officially, the scene was treated as if it never existed. That was deliberate. The studio didn't view the change as cutting story content. They viewed it as correcting tone. To them, the film still ended in the same place, monsters defeated, town saved. But the feeling of the ending had shifted, and that feeling was considered dangerous. Calling attention to the removed implication would have forced audiences to reevaluate the entire film retroactively. It would have turned a creature comedy into something quieter and more unsettling. So the change was handled invisibly. The footage wasn't highlighted. The implication wasn't denied. It was simply minimized. The result is an ending that technically resolves the plot, but philosophically refuses closure. Number 5. The graboids were never supposed to be unique. One of the most misleading assumptions viewers make is that the graboids are singular threats, rare, isolated. Anomalies that just happened to surface near one unlucky town. But early drafts never supported that interpretation. The creatures were implied to be part of a larger subterranean ecosystem, ancient adaptive organisms that had existed long before humans arrived. They weren't invading the desert, they belonged to it. And the town of perfection wasn't targeted, It was simply built in the wrong place. The hidden ending's ground movement wasn't about surviving graboids. It was about scale, about realizing that what was destroyed might represent only a fraction of what existed beneath the surface. The studio feared that implication. It made the problem too big to laugh off. Ironically, the franchise would expand anyway, but the original film chose restraint not because the idea wasn't there, but because it was too large to fully reveal. Number 6. Why silence was more important than explosion. The original ending beat was quiet by design. There was no music sting, no final scare, no last monster bursting through the ground. Just a subtle movement beneath the surface. Barely noticeable, easily dismissed if you weren't paying attention. That silence was intentional. Loud endings reassure audiences. Quiet endings make them think. The goal wasn't fear in the moment, it was unease afterward. The kind that lingers once the laughter fades and the screen goes dark. Studios understand spectacle. Explosions are easy to control. Silence is not. Silence invites interpretation. It allows doubt to creep in. And doubt is risky when you're selling a monster movie as entertainment. So the silence was trimmed. The implications softened. The desert was allowed to rest. Not because it was safe, but because acknowledging that it wasn't would have changed the film's identity entirely. Number 7. The film's rules were never complete. Tremors appears to establish clear monster rules. Don't move. Don't vibrate. Stay off the ground. Learn the pattern and you survive. Break it and you die. Simple. But early versions of the story suggested those rules were provisional. Temporary solutions, not permanent safeguards. The creatures weren't dumb. They were responsive. They learned. They adapted. The hidden ending vibration implied evolution, that the graboids were already adjusting to human behavior, that the rules which saved the characters this time might fail the next time they were tested. That idea wasn't removed because it was wrong. It was deferred because it was unsettling. It turned survival into a countdown rather than a conclusion. So the rules were allowed to stand for now. Clean, understandable, comforting, but incomplete. And once you notice that incompleteness, the victory no longer feels secure. Number 8. Why the victory feels too easy. Rewatch the final act carefully. Once the characters understand how the graboids work, the monsters fall quickly, almost effortlessly. The solution clicks into place and the threat collapses. That efficiency was intentional, but not for the reason most viewers assume. The film wanted the victory to feel fragile, conditional, dependent on circumstances lining up just right. It wasn't meant to feel earned through dominance, but through timing. The hidden ending reinforced that fragility. It suggested that the characters didn't outsmart the ecosystem, they merely stumbled upon a temporary advantage. Without that final implication, the efficiency reads as triumph. With it, the efficiency reads as luck. And luck is not a foundation you want to build safety on, especially when the ground itself is the enemy. Number 9. The studio's fear of unfun horror. Tremors balances comedy and terror with precision. The studio was comfortable with danger that ended in laughter, monsters you could defeat, fear you could shake off. They were not comfortable with danger that lingered. The original ending threatened to tilt the film into existential horror. Not the fear of being eaten, but the fear of standing on something you don't control, of realizing that the environment itself is hostile, indifferent, and unchanged by your survival. That shift was considered off-brand, too heavy for a film marketed as fun, so the tone was corrected. The implication dulled, the laughter allowed to stand as the final note. But the bones of that darker ending are still there, and once you sense them, the humor feels thinner and the silence underneath it louder. Number 10. Why the franchise changed direction. Later, Tremors sequels expand the mythology openly. New creatures, new life cycles, new rules that rewrite what the original monsters were capable of. That expansion didn't contradict the first film. It fulfilled what the original ending quietly refused to state outright. The buried implication left room intentionally or not for escalation. The original film didn't define the threat completely, because doing so would have limited the story's scale. By leaving questions unanswered, it allowed future installments to externalize what was only hinted at before. In that sense, the franchise didn't abandon the original vision, it made it louder, more explicit, less restrained. What the first film whispered, the sequels eventually shouted. But the seed was always there, buried beneath the sand. Number 11. The ending was about scale, not survival. The removed implication was never about whether the characters lived or died. Survival was already decided. What mattered was what that survival meant. Humans solved a local problem, a specific encounter, a temporary disruption. The planet itself remained unchanged. The ecosystem remained intact. That's a dangerous idea in a genre built on conquest and resolution. Monster movies traditionally end when the threat is eliminated. Tremors quietly suggested something else, that threats embedded in the environment don't end. They pause. The hidden ending shifted focus from individual bravery to planetary indifference, and that shift was too unsettling to sit comfortably at the end of a crowd-pleasing film. So the scale was reduced, the story made smaller, the victory made personal instead of universal. But the larger truth never disappeared. Number 12. Why the camera looked down instead of up. In the original version of the ending, the camera's final emphasis was the ground, not the sky, not the characters' faces, not celebration. That choice inverted traditional monster movie grammar. Threats usually come from above or ahead. Here, danger came from beneath, unseen, unacknowledged, and unresolved. By focusing downward, the film denied the audience visual reassurance. There was no clear enemy to look at, no confirmation of safety, just terrain that might move again. The theatrical cut shifted attention back to faces and relief. The land returned to background texture rather than active threat. But it was never meant to be background. The ground was the antagonist all along, and that camera choice quietly told the truth the characters didn't want to hear. Number 13. The ending was too honest. The hidden ending didn't lie to the audience. That was its problem. It told the truth the film had been circling from the beginning. The graboids weren't beaten, they were encountered, temporarily avoided, briefly understood. That honesty conflicted with audience expectations. People wanted closure, they wanted certainty. They wanted to leave knowing the danger was gone. The ending refused to offer that reassurance, and because of that, it was softened. Not erased, just made easier to ignore. But honesty has a way of lingering. Even without the final beat intact, the film still feels slightly unresolved. That discomfort isn't accidental. It's residue from an ending that was never fully allowed to exist. Number 14. Why you still feel uneasy. Watching the ending. Even without the removed moment, something about the ending doesn't fully settle. The desert doesn't feel safe. The silence doesn't feel earned. That's because the film was constructed with a different emotional landing in mind. One where relief was undercut by doubt, where survival didn't equal control. The theatrical ending resolves the story mechanically but emotionally. The architecture points somewhere darker. The pacing, the framing, the quiet beats that linger just a second too long. Those elements remain because removing them would have required rebuilding the entire finale. Instead, the implication was simply lowered beneath the surface, and viewers still sense it, even if they can't articulate why. Unease doesn't need explanation, it only needs space. Number 15. The final scene. They didn't want you to think about. Tremors was supposed to end with laughter, but it was built to end with doubt. The hidden final moment wasn't a sequel hook, it wasn't a scare, it was a warning. A quiet acknowledgement that humans don't own the ground they stand on. That survival doesn't equal mastery, that silence doesn't equal safety, and that some threats don't announce their return. The most dangerous thing in Tremors was never what exploded out of the sand. It was what stayed behind after everything went quiet, unseen, unchanged, and waiting. And that is the ending they didn't want you to sit with. Tremors may look like a monster movie about survival, but beneath the humor and explosions, it tells a quieter story about uncertainty. The creatures can be studied, The rules can be learned, but the land itself remains unchanged. What was buried was never defeated, only avoided. And that final implication, softened but never erased, is why the ending still unsettles viewers decades later. Because some dangers don't return with noise or warning. They wait. And when they do, they rise from the place we trusted the most, the ground beneath our feet.